Join Robert F. Kennedy Jr. live at the Children's Health Defense Conference November 3rd through 5th. Come together in Savannah, Georgia with powerful speakers like Vera Sharav, Catherine Austin Fitz, Asim Malhotra, and so many more. We'll rise and resist as we fight industry corruption, mass surveillance, and censorship. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as we advocate for worldwide rights to health freedom. Visit this link to see the complete lineup of incredible speakers and topics. Space is limited, so register today.
Good morning, defenders of truth, freedom, and children's health. Good morning, CHD. My name is Stephanie Lucrecio, and I am your host for today, Monday, October 2nd, 2023. We begin today with an update on a story we covered over the weekend on the dangers of school-based health centers. The Defender headline reads, "Family investigated for keeping teen home after school-based health center gave bag of unlabeled Zoloft to 17-year-old. A federally funded school-based health center in Maine reportedly gave prescription antidepressant pills in a plastic baggie to a 17-year-old girl without her parents' knowledge or consent. Experts said this is what they feared would happen as these centers expand across the country. Concerns, the father, Eric Sack, pulled his daughter out of school the following week. The Maine Wire reported what happened next. On Thursday, an agent from Child Protective Services called Sack and informed him that they would be arriving shortly to make a surprise visit to his home to conduct a child welfare investigation. Sack told the Maine Wire that he or his wife may have signed a consent form at the start of the school year, but he still thought this incident violated his rights. Justine Tanguay, an attorney with nearly 20 years of experience advocating for children in various areas of the law, told the Defender these consent forms are a key issue for parents to be aware of. This is a slippery slope of blanket consent forms that put parents in a position of defending medical decisions. Our hearts go out to this family, and we will continue to cover the story. Now, we're going to go to our first segment with Dr. Mark Arazi on the international Phonegate scandal. So we start this morning with breaking news out of France. Recently, the iPhone 12 was banned in France, and this news sent shockwaves all throughout the world because we know that iPhones are something that we are using daily, our children are using daily, and truth be told, these devices could be greatly impacting our health. Here to discuss in more detail, we have Dr. Mark Arazi. He is a French physician, entrepreneur, author, local elected official, and the co-founder of NGO Phonegate. He is here to discuss the banning of the iPhone 12 in France. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your invitation.
It's such an important conversation. I mean, I see kids as young as 2 years old scrolling and going through their phones. It's something that's part of our daily life. So let's dive into the conversation. The iPhone 12 being banned in France has made waves around the world. Is this the first time a cell phone has been banned in France?
No, Stephanie. Now with the iPhone 12 is the 43 model of cell phone was being pinned by our national agency, whose name is ANFR. So you have all the company, most of the most important company was being pinned since 2018. So you see that it was 5 years ago. Like Motorola, like Huawei, Samsung, Sony, Nokia, and so on. So all the company were concerned by this non-compliance with the regulation, French regulation, but also European regulation, and because we are talking to people living in the US and Canada. Most of what I'm going to talk is about European regulation.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of differences with European regulations and what's allowed here in the States. And it's not just technology. I mean, there's differences in the food that we're allowed to eat here versus the food that you're allowed to eat in France and the European Union. So I'm curious to know what goes into testing cell phones in France? How do they allow something to come to market?
So what I could say, the regulation for putting cell phone in the market, French market, European market, or US market, are unsafe. The regulation has been done just for making for the industry to connect people to each other. They do not care about health, users' health, and also they knew that when they made a deception, that global deception, that they overexpose billions of users now.
So, talk to me about some of the concerns with the radiation. What's the process for testing radiation, and what are the allowable limits as per the French government and the French authorities?
It's not really the same in Europe, in the US, but at this moment, with the pressure we have been doing in France and in Europe, for example, the regulation permit to test a cell phone like in levitation, it was something like 50 to 25 millimeters. And now in the US, most of the company are allowed to test the phone at 10 to 50 millimeters. The difference at this moment, because of our action in France and Europe, we are going to force the European Commission to test all the cell phone at zero distance. And it's very important to understand that when you test the cell phone, and in a way, an unrealistic way, because we are using very close to the body, it's really unsafe for people. And you had a very important investigation in US made by a journalist, the Pulitzer Prize journalist whose name is Sam Rowe. It was in 2019, and it was in the Chicago Tribune, and it made quite a big noise at this moment, showing that there was a real problem in the way we were testing the phone. But at this moment now, with the decision of the French decision to ban iPhone 12, now there was a tsunami of media all over the world. And I suppose that now in the US and all over the world, people are going to be much more aware about this scandal, and I could say industrial scandal and sanitary scandal.
One of the questions that I had, because I know the iPhone 12 at this point is older than some of the newer phones that are out there, are there concerns in France with the newer iPhones that are dropping based on what you've discovered about the iPhone 12?
What I could say, and it's, when I launched this alert, it was 7 years ago. Now, what I could say 7 years ago, after my alert, that most of the cell phones, we say all the cell phones, are not safe. And now we can prove legally what I say, because it's very important to say that we have a problem with the regulation, and also that all the people today when are overexposed. And when I hear that that regulator and government say, "Oh, everything's okay," it's a deception. And now it's a deception. We can prove, and we are going to make. You have already legal action in US and in Canada. And maybe, I don't know if you were aware about that, but last year in Canada, a judge authorized a class action, what's called Phonegate class action, against Apple and Samsung. So we are at the beginning of this new scandal, but all will be in the media, and I appreciate that CHD permit to me to talk about this new scandal this morning.
Yeah, I'm very excited that we're able to talk about it. One of the things I wonder is, I know that it's banned, but for people who've already purchased it, are they requiring that people switch out their existing iPhone 12s for a different device?
No, we have a very important scandal, but we have very simple solution. What you say in United States, it's a sentence I hear in the United States. Your best friend, keep your cell phone, keep your cell phone far from your body, is your best friend. So it's very simple to protect your health, for almost if you are children, almost if you are a young man, almost if you are pregnant. Don't keep your cell phone near the head. Don't put it in a bra. You can see that for young people and many people, to put it in a pant pocket. So with this very simple gesture, you can protect your health completely. It's very important to understand that we have a very simple solution. But now, government have to make advertising and campaign of promotion to say to people to protect them, and at this moment they do not, and they will have to do that. And sometimes I compare to the seat belts, with the car. Before, everyone was driving and there was no seat belt, and the kids were not protecting. It's impossible to think that it will be possible today. So it will be the same with the cell phone. And what I'm going to tell you, that it will be like the seatbelt, and we see no more people like in the cinema or the advertising and everywhere, people putting the cell phone near the head. And what I can say, it's to be very careful, almost if you are young people, almost if you have kids, almost if you are grandparents, So we are using cell phone every day for hours. We put them near the body for hours, and every day for many years.
Yeah, it's so important to mitigate that exposure as much as you can. So talk to me a little bit about Phonegate and what prompted you to write this.
Oh, it was very important for me that to talk about all the work I work, and now with a lot of people all over the world, and lawyers, scientists, and medical doctors, and all the people at this moment trying to change really the battle. We are in a very tough battle. That industry is very strong, and they have in France, for example, most of the media, they have owner who are from telephone industry. So it's very difficult battle. And for that, I think it was very important to explain that in a book. First, it was published in French. It was in 2020. And after that, it has been translated with the support of my publisher, with Massot Édition, a French publisher. And it's not available in English. And the name is very clear. I can show maybe the book, and it is, I don't know, yeah, that's it, yeah. Phonegate, the name Overexposed and Deceived, what the cell phone industry doesn't want you to know. And all you will learn about what they have done, and also what they try to hide. I can't explain all this. So it was so important that there was a book to explain everything. And I suppose I will have to write maybe a second part, because now there is so many things who happen in 2 years that I can write another book now.
Well, I'm so thankful that you're doing this research and sharing the information, because I think it's so important for people and parents everywhere to really understand the dangers of EMR radiation to begin with, and specifically as these phones are developed, how it's getting worse and worse. So I appreciate all the practical advice that you gave our audience. And I want you to hold up that book one more time so people can see it. Phonegate. If you haven't seen it, definitely go out there and get it. There you go. Perfect. Yes, perfect. And how can people get in touch with you? Is there a website or something that we can point people?
Yeah. We have a website in French, in English, and in Spanish. So you have all the news every time. At this moment, it's a tsunami, and we are going to make two things. My ebook is for free until I would like to thank my publisher who is okay to put it for free for all US and Canadian people who want to, and all over the world, people who want to read the book for free until the 18th of October. And also, in a few days, we are going to put a calculator. You will be able to put your SAR inside the calculator, the SAR of your cell phone, SAR head, SAR trunk, and SAR extremities. And with the calculator, you will have the real SAR of each cell phone in US, Canada, and Europe. So I think it will be very interesting for people to see the difference when what they think is the SAR of their cell phone and what is the real SAR.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything, for all the information. And I'm sure people will be looking to get in touch with you and seeing the resources that you're putting out. And I hope that we can continue the conversation as all this continues in France and Europe. Please come back for updates. Keep us posted. And thank you so much for all of your hard work and diligence on this. We're really appreciative of you being here this morning.
Stephanie, and it will be a pleasure to come back and to talk about Phonegate and to your TV morning show. Bye.
Thank you so much.
What's the address of the emergency?
I'm at Florida State University, and there's a man with a gun in the library. There's someone with a gun in here, and we're all hiding under the tables. He pointed his gun at me, and I feared for my life. Somebody shot like 4 bullets right in somebody. You guys got to stop this guy. Oh, my God.
There has been a shooting. We have law enforcement on scene and medical en route. We have officers. They are all walking around with their guns drawn.
Headquarters, shots fired. Headquarters, shots fired. Shots fired. Suspect down.
When I learned through media reports that it was Myron May, I almost thought there must be some other Myron May. This can't be the guy I knew. And when I learned that it was, in fact, this person who I had come to know and who I liked and who I considered a friend, I was so taken aback.
The real Myron May had no plans for things to turn out the way they did.
A lot of people don't understand how a guy who was really the picture of calm and had a demeanor that was so inviting and accepting could do something that was so heinous.
He thinks he's part of the CIA. He thinks they're trying to kill him, and he has a bunch of paperwork in his backpack that he's a CIA agent and he was supposed to assassinate Obama.
The United States does not have a monopoly on crazy people. It's not the only country that has psychosis.
One of the first things that happened is, I started hearing voices. I started hearing the rapture's coming. The rapture's coming. I didn't even know what it was. I eventually started to believe that I was the second coming. Looking back now, I'd say it's almost like the gates of hell opened up and something else completely took over me.
Are you safe where you are?
No, absolutely not.
I had the privilege of watching this over the weekend, and it was truly an eye-opening documentary that I think every parent should watch. It is clear to me more now than ever that pharma companies are preying on our children. There is an epidemic of young people being negatively affected by psychiatric drugs. Our guest today has been researching and documenting the extensive damage these drugs have for over a decade. He is the creator of the documentary Speed Demons, Killing for Attention, which we just watched a trailer for. I am honored to welcome Andrew Tebow to the show. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your work. This documentary is a must-see for everybody.
Thanks for having me on the show, Stephanie.
Yeah, so let's dive in because I know that we have so much to cover. Your work and knowledge of this subject is extensive. What have you found since you started looking so closely into the drugging of our children in the name of mental health?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Stephanie, to present some of my findings to your viewers. It's been a multi-year investigation involved a successful 2-year lawsuit against the FDA. If we can just bring up the second slide there. You know, what I found is that there is a link between psychotropic medications and homicides. So in this particular case, which is the second case we cover in Speed Demons, we can see the actual forensic evaluation of Ryan Ailes. He was a 26-year-old University of North Dakota senior who killed his 5-week-old daughter, Tyra. We can see very clearly that the state's own forensic psychiatrist said he was suffering from substance, in this case, Adderall-induced psychosis with hallucinations and delusions. Right. So for all the fact checkers to say, you know, correlation is not causation, this case was adjudicated to be, you know, the Adderall was adjudicated to be the cause of this murder and attempted suicide. And what's really interesting, the other point that's really interesting about this particular forensic report is if we drill down to point 3, we can see that the forensic psychiatrist says that Ryan Ailes has no mental disease, and that as long as he stays off his meds, he presents no risk to society. Now, this runs completely opposite to what we've been conditioned with this Madison Avenue slick slogan, you know, people who do bad things must be off their meds. In this case, the psychiatrist is saying no. The homicidal psychosis was caused by the medication, and he presents no risk to society and has no mental defect as long as he stays off the meds. And we can see the headline you wouldn't see today, right? Slaying was reaction from hyperactivity medication from, at the time, very reputable outfit, the Associated Press. But now there's a lot of hush money that's being paid by Big Pharma to the mainstream media in the form of $6.4 billion a year in direct consumer advertising. And that's to say nothing of the money that's coming from organizations like Google, Alphabet, Facebook, Meta that are getting dumped into things like the Poynter Institute, PolitiFact, and these other biased, air quotes, fact-checking organizations. So this one is a fact. It's an inconvenient fact, but it's a fact that Adderall, very commonly prescribed for ADHD, has been adjudicated in a court of law as being the cause of a homicide. And this isn't a one-off. We can see on the side of the slide here, there are almost half a dozen different ADHD medications today that require a homicidal ideation label warning. So that's shocking. Most people don't read that far down in the label, but it's there. And these warnings will continue because A, there is a link and association that's coming up in the post-marketing surveillance, but B, the drug companies themselves do not want to be sued under the common law failure to warn. So we're going to see more and more of these warnings on the labels of the drug. So we move on to our next case. This is a case of a triple murder suicide. It's a case of Donald Schell, who was taking the commonly prescribed antidepressant Paxil, known under the generic name of paroxetine. And he killed his wife, Rita, and his daughter, Deborah, and his granddaughter, Alyssa Tobin. So the survivors sued at the time SmithKline Beecham, now known as GlaxoSmithKline. And what we see here from the jury form is the question that was put to the jury is based on a preponderance of evidence. And keep in mind, this is all the scientific evidence that SmithKline Beecham, aka GSK, could muster. Can Paxil cause an individual to commit suicide and or homicide? And the answer is clearly yes. Again, this is a fact. Causation equals causation. The second question that was put to them is, in this specific case, was Paxil the proximate cause of this triple homicide and suicide? And again, the jury found yes, it was the proximate cause. So this is a pill that's going to be very difficult for the fake fact checkers who simply rely on dial quotes to pharma shells to digest, but it's true. And the last question, well, actually the second to last question that they asked was, if the answer is yes to the previous question, what responsibility do you assign to the defendant, in this case, SmithKline Beecham? And incredibly, the jury said they were 80% responsible. Now that's noteworthy because the person who actually pulled the trigger was Donald Schell, and he was only deemed to be 20% responsible, and the family was awarded $7 million in the suit. So there are case after case of these. If we could move to the next slide. So in addition to documented cases of psychotropic medications being the adjudicated cause of homicidal psychosis, there's another hypothesis that not many people are talking about. And that's simply that the antidepressants simply stop working. You know, recently we've seen the ads. We've seen the ads with the tongue depressor and the paper plate with a smiley face. This one here is for Rexulti, where they have coined a new term that actually doesn't exist in the scientific literature called partial response to depression treatment, i.e. your medication isn't working anymore. And so they recommend what's called adjunct therapy, which is really amounts to polypharmacy. But in the scientific literature, this is a well-known phenomenon. It's called tachyphylaxis. And in fact, the National Institutes of Mental Health did a study and found that antidepressants simply stop working for 1 in 4 patients. Now that's significant because we have 40 million people taking antidepressants in this country. That means 10 million people are essentially walking around thinking they're being treated for depression when they're really not. And keep in mind, this is a limited study. So it's very likely that the longer you're on the medication, the higher the likelihood that you'll experience this tachyphylaxis. If we could move to the next slide. So, you know, every time we have a mass shooting, you hear a couple things. One is it's the guns, it's the guns, it's the guns. But then we also hear, you know, a lot of talk about mental health. And people come out of the woodwork and say, you know, we need a new law, we need new funding, we don't have access to mental health in this country. Case in point would be the Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act that was passed after the Sandy Hook shootings in 2012. It was a multi-billion-dollar windfall to Big Pharma, but obviously did not stop any mass shootings. Here we have 3 prominent psychiatrists, and we have links in the next slide. We can go ahead and move there. The honest psychiatrists admit that psychiatry and psychiatrists cannot predict or prevent mass violence. And so I've got a couple links there people can follow, but they're concrete cases. You know, the Aurora Theater mass shooter, James Holmes, he had confessed to his psychiatrist, Dr. Lynn Fenton, that he fantasized about killing people. And instead of reporting him to authorities, she prescribed him Zoloft and Klonopin, an antidepressant, and a benzodiazepine. Similarly, Virginia Tech mass shooter Sang-Wei Cho was involuntarily committed by a judge for a mental health evaluation. The evaluator said he did not present a threat to an imminent danger to himself or to others, and did not require involuntary hospitalization, and 37 people died as a result. Another case that we could put on here, it's not on the slide, is Elliot Rodger. You know, Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office went out to do a welfare check on him, and he basically lied to their faces. He was planning his massacre, as they were at the door. So time and time again, psychiatry has failed, and the medications have failed to, prevent violence. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. One prominent case led to a New York Times article, and we see that the mainstream media has shaped a false narrative. And in Benedict Carey's New York Times piece, a psychiatrist who had been killed, his name was Wayne S. Fenton, prominent schizophrenia expert. And Ben Carey says, a sad debate deepens. Well, to have a debate, you have to have the facts. And the false debate or the false choice in that piece is that we have to put people on medication involuntarily in order to protect society. Well, what Ben Carey didn't know was that Otsuka, the manufacturer, had reported to the FDA that this 19-year-old, his name was Vitaly Davidov, had become agitated and committed homicide while on aripiprazole. The brand name is Abilify. This particular event narrative came out of my 2-year lawsuit against the FDA. What's interesting to note is that Vitaly Davidov was then committed to Clifton T. Perkins Mental Hospital in Maryland, where, while on medication, he then murdered his roommate. So we can see that psychiatric medications don't prevent violence, and anybody who tells you that they do is simply lying to you. This is an example of what's called positive rechallenge. It is the gold standard for causality assessment, right? This person was put back on the medication and then reoffended. So we know there's a strong correlation between the medication here. Let's move along in the presentation. So here we have a study of homicides that occurred in psychiatric hospitals in Australia and New Zealand. Interesting to note that the authors of this study received speaker fees from AstraZeneca, manufactured at the time of Seroquel. And we can even see in this chart that one of the patients that committed homicide was on a 200 milligram dose of quetiapine, which is Seroquel, the antipsychotic. What's noteworthy here is that 9 out of the 10 patients who killed people inside of a psychiatric hospital were in fact on medication at the time they committed the homicides. So there is no doubt, if you hear medication will stop violence, it's false. And it's a false sense of security, because many of the proponents of things like assisted outpatient treatment will say that you can divert people from prison if they're on medication and release them into society. Let's move to the next slide. So this effort culminated really in a lawsuit against the FDA in 2014. I made a Freedom of Information Act request for, as it turns out, 716 homicide drug adverse event reports that were made to the FDA between 2004 and 2014. Well, the FDA kicked the can. They wouldn't provide me the files. And finally, in August of 2015, I filed a federal lawsuit. And you can see here that based on the pleadings in the trial, the judge awarded me court costs because I substantially prevailed in the case. And I provide this information to your viewers, Stephanie, because it shows the extent to which one determined citizen can hold our government to task. The FDA is meant to be a watchdog for American consumers, but they become a lapdog for the pharmaceutical industry. So let's move to the next slide. Of these 716 cases, all of the major classes of psychotropic medications are implicated. You have antidepressants, you have anxiolytics, you have hypnotic sedatives, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and stimulants. But far and away, the highest are the antidepressants. So there's a lot of smoke there. And if we move to the next slide, we'll drill down on this. Now, probably most of your viewers are aware that these drugs are not tested by the FDA. They're tested by the drug companies. And so there's a lot of different ways that they can cheat on those tests. And they're very short tests. They're not examining the long-term effects of the drug. But one thing that's never been done is they've never tested the drugs together to see how they interact. So I think this graph is important because it shows us that when you start layering these drugs together in what's called polypharmacy, you're exponentially increasing the risk. So the most lethal drug cocktails are the antidepressants plus an anxiolytic. The antidepressants cause what's called akathisia, cause a person to ruminate about harming themselves and others. And the anxiolytic has essentially a disinhibiting effect, right? So the one says, hey, why don't you go kill somebody? And the other one says, that's not a bad idea. So similar effect with the hypnotic sedatives, things like Ambien, Lunesta. There's a case in the FDA files where a 70-year-old man was given an Ambien at 10 p.m., didn't put him to sleep. His wife gave him another one around 11 or midnight, and he woke up the next morning chained, handcuffed to a gurney, hadn't remembered stabbing his wife 20 times. So these FDA files are replete with horror stories just like this. And we're taught that, hey, if one drug doesn't work, remember the slide about the partial antidepressant response, we'll just add another one. And oftentimes we find that doesn't solve the problem. It just compounds the problem. So go to the next slide. So what's interesting about this is that what I found were 716 cases of homicide over a decade from 2004 to 2014. But that doesn't tell the whole story. So MedWatch, or the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, according to sworn testimony to the U.S. Senate of a former associate director of HHS by the name of Janet Heinrich, experts believe that the FAER system only contains between 1% and 10% of the actual number of cases. So those 716 cases, if we use their math, really only represent between 1% and 10% of the cases. So the actual number is closer to anywhere from 7,000 to 70,000. It's truly shocking and mind-numbing, the amount of cases that are in the FDA system. We can go to the next slide. So we'll end on this and open up the conversation, but there was a bombshell revelation within the FDA's pleadings. So in a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, it's a type of litigation that doesn't exist elsewhere in jurisprudence. Normally you have the ability to do discovery. So you get to look through the documents yourself. Well, in this case, it's kind of like playing Go Fish. You say to the government, do you have ace of spades? And they say no. Meanwhile, they're holding 4 aces. So the government is required to do a sworn declaration to the judge in the case and do what's called a Vaughan index to say that they have lawfully disclosed the information or redacted it, whatever the case is. And in explaining the excessive redactions that they had done, the FDA came out in a sworn declaration and admitted that cases that were responsive to my FOIA requests involved school shootings, and we can see it right here in black and white. So any fake fact checkers that say there's no link, there's no association, there's no correlation, there's no relationship between psychotropic medications and school shootings is just simply lying to you, because the government itself has admitted it, has acknowledged it in sworn pleadings. That was Nancy Sager, who was the director of the Division of Information Disclosure Policy, which is kind of an Orwellian name for an agency. It should be called the director of the Division of Information Denial Policy, because that's what they tried to do. They tried to cover the football on this, but unfortunately for them, they lost. Unfortunately for the American people, we won, and the information is out there. It's on a site called murdermeds.com, and you can look up any medication you're curious about to see if it's linked to homicides.
The research is incredible. It's terrifying how this is going on. You know, I think for a lot of people, COVID has sort of lifted the veil and made them understand that the governing agencies that are supposed to be watching for us, and you said it in the documentary, it's sort of like the fox guarding the hen house. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening with these FDA approvals? Because I think for many people, I know you touched on it a little bit, but you did this comparison in the documentary about car companies basically doing their own testing and be like, no. It's good. The seatbelts work. The airbags deploy. Everything's fine. You're good. Put it to market. Can you share a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes here? Because the number of prescription medications that are being pushed through, the percentages have gone up dramatically in the last couple of decades. Can you share a little bit about why that is and how very poor the research is going into these drugs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it was Dr. Jeffrey LeCase from Florida State who really explained that well, I think, in Speed Demons. I want to encourage everyone to go out there and watch the film for yourself. He said that you could fill a book with the tricks that the drug companies can do to make a drug look more safe and more effective than it really is. But things have drastically changed with a law that was called PDUFA. It's been renewed, I think, 6 or 7 times since its inception. It stands for the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And what happened is there was a lot of pressure, particularly during the 90s with the AIDS epidemic, to fast track drugs. And so to facilitate this fast track approval, PDUFA was passed. And what changed was the dynamic, because now today the pharmaceutical industry funds the FDA's CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, to the tune of 75%. So that's made the pharmaceutical industry, it's a pay-to-play system where they pay millions of dollars for each new drug application or NDA. So that skews the results that we get. And as a result, 96% of all drugs that are applied for are approved now. Before PDUFA was passed, it was closer to a third. So it's really just opened the floodgates of a lot of drugs that aren't well tested, and then they would rely on the FAERS, aka MedWatch, for post-marketing surveillance to see if there's any problem with the general population. So you could make an argument the drugs are essentially being tested on the general population.
It's infuriating. And one of the things that's really clear to me is that this is predatory. I mean, kids are scrolling on social media. They're being exposed to all these surveys. Last night, after watching this documentary, my son came to me and said, "Mom, I took a survey and I think I have ADHD." And it's remarkable to me that a couple of questions with no context of what's going on in a person's life, you can just get this, quote, diagnosis from an online internet survey. There's something called disease mongering that you talked about in this documentary. And it basically is the lead up to the medication. So the fact of bringing attention to these different diseases that they're creating to make these drugs relevant, it's a whole lead up process. And our children primarily are the ones who are being fed this information to believe that there's something wrong with them. I think you said in the documentary that we've made being a child like a disease, like there's something wrong with just being a child. So can you talk a little bit about this disease mongering and how children are being preyed upon and told that there's something wrong with them for just simply being kids?
Yeah, it is infuriating. And actually that quote came from none other than Dr. Alan Francis, who is, by some accounts, the godfather of psychiatry. He edited the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version 4 that was in effect from 1993 to 2013. So there's definitely a medicalization of ordinary life. And these kids oftentimes, because they're some of the youngest kids to go into kindergarten, they're physiologically, they're not as developed. But you're absolutely right. This is a predatory practice, and these online surveys are a prime example. And I think Dr. Adrian Feuberman's response in Speed Demons was telling. You know, it's illegal to promote a drug that's not approved, but it's not illegal to promote a disease. And so they create these fake diseases and then, work with the APA to get them accepted. An example that we talk about in Speed Demons is binge eating disorder. So that was fabricated out of whole cloth. You had these drugs, whole class of drugs, amphetamines, that were banned in 1972 by the FDA, that were commonly being used to treat obesity. But instead of treating obesity, now they're used to treat binge eating disorder. And the Binge Eating Disorder Association is an AstroTurf organization that was essentially funded and founded by Big Pharma. So we see these pop up. They enlist, celebrities like Adam Levine or Monica Seles to go out and talk about the disease, because, as Adrian Feuberman pointed out, selling a disease sells the drug. And it's worth noting that, these ads, talk to your doctor, they're not legal in any other country on the planet except for New Zealand. So it's completely warped that dynamic. And our kids are falling prey to these slick Madison Avenue slogans and questionnaires, and they're very much defenseless, very, very vulnerable to this.
And with the rollout of a lot of school-based health centers, we're seeing now that these surveys are being given inside of the schools. So they're actively quizzing our children inside the schools, asking, sort of planting the seeds. What are your thoughts about these surveys and how they're being handed out? Like, they're basically designed for the outcome to be that something's wrong with you, correct?
Yeah, well, teachers, before the clinics came, the teachers have long been used as a recruitment army for the pharmaceutical industry. A great book to read on this is called The ADHD Explosion by Dr. Stephen Henshaw, a Berkeley psychologist, and his colleague, Dr. Richard Scheffler, who's a public health economist. And they were able to tie back the skyrocketing rates of ADHD diagnosis to No Child Left Behind. Right. I've interviewed teachers who said that when they started introducing performance-based pay in the classroom, teachers were financially motivated then to pressure parents to diagnose the children. They get into what's called the federal 504 program, and they get an IEP, an individual education plan, and then the federal money starts flowing into the school. One first grade teacher I interviewed who had a quad with 120 students might have 4 or 5 students that had a diagnosis. But once that law was passed, she said, the rate was more like 17 or 18 of that 120. And she called them alphabet kids, right? They have letters after the name like ADHD or ASD or OCD. It's very sad what they're doing, just stamping these children and adolescents with a mental health diagnosis that, we saw in the first slide in the case of Ryan Ailes. He didn't have a mental defect. He didn't have a mental disease. And he fell prey to, the propaganda that Adderall will make you do better on tests or do better at school. And he was having a problem with a mathematics course in the senior year. It had devastating effects on him and his family.
It's scary because the truth is that college students will be exposed to Adderall and other types of these drugs to concentrate, to focus, to do well. So it's a conversation that parents need to have with their children before sending them off to college, because the sad thing is that one dose of these medications could potentially be a life-changing situation. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I watched recently the Netflix series Painkillers. And what I found interesting is the pharmaceutical companies have this formula for success. They have certain looking, reps that go out, these young, attractive reps that go out, and then they have these campaigns. Talk a little bit about these back to school campaigns to push Adderall and Ritalin and some of these other drugs for ADHD in children at the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels really between painkillers and dope sick and what's happening today. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you Google the numbers, they're about half the number of psychostimulant deaths in this country as opioids. So there are tens of thousands of people that are overdosing on these drugs. It's a big problem, and we're kind of at the earlier phase of this epidemic. You know, sadly, dope sick and painkillers came 20 years too late to save the lives. But yeah, we talk about in Speed Demons how they have back to school specials where the reps are getting bonuses for getting the most kids medicated at the start of each school year. And as Jeffrey LeCase pointed out, it really just exposes the fact that these children are a market. In fact, Shire, which is now known as Takeda Pharmaceuticals, one of their VPs, a VP of research, referred to the ADHD as a business for them. Now, ironically, he then turned whistleblower on a lawsuit that claimed that Shire was making false claims about Adderall and Vyvanse, and he won that suit. And the federal government and I think it was 28 different states and District of Columbia joined his qui tam, and rather than go to trial, Shire paid $54 million to settle the suit, which is like a parking ticket. You know, they're making $2 billion a year plus on the most popular ADHD medication. So small price to pay.
Yeah, it's just the cost of doing business for them, but the profits are certainly outweighing any of the penalties that they're paying. One of the things that you alluded to, and I want to expand on a little bit, is this concept of astroturfing. You know, some of these advocacy grassroots groups that they're basically putting into place to support the narrative that the pharmaceutical companies want to put out there. So it just sort of reinforces the message that they want to send, which is that these drugs are safe, effective, and necessary to treat these things. Can you talk a little bit about the infiltration of Big Pharma and the revolving door with many of these so-called nonprofits that are supposed to be advocating for the different disorders, but instead they're really just wings of the pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, I'm not sure who actually coined that term, but it's very apropos. You know, AstroTurf is fake grassroots. So it's you know, really seizing on some of the more positive aspects of our society about citizen participation, about representation, about being heard. So you'll see a lot of these organizations being called to testify before Congress. But when you pull back the layers of the onion, and in fact, Iowa Republican Senator Charles Grassley did that, and he found that a lot of the organizations like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, was funded to the tune of 75% by the pharmaceutical industry. You know, organizations that I talk about in Speed Demons like CHAD or Binge Eating Disorder Association or the National Eating Disorders Association, they're all on the tape. Sometimes it's direct money, or in other cases, like with CHAD, you'll have the pharmaceutical industry buy thousands and thousands of copies of their magazine that nobody wants to read, Attitude, and that's a kind of an in-kind contribution. But these organizations are essentially kind of a red herring. They're a straw person for a proxy, if you will, for the pharmaceutical industry. And there's some very well-meaning people that fall prey to the marketing. One example of the marketing was you had the drug flibanserin, also known as Adyi, which was billed as the female version of Viagra. Well, Sprout Pharmaceuticals at the time started an ingenious social media campaign called #EvenTheScore. And the premise was, well, men have Viagra and Cialis. Why don't we have a drug? Well, the difference is, you know, Adyi had been in front of the FDA advisory committee twice and did not get a recommendation because there were very dubious results in terms of efficacy and a very high risk of side effects. But because of the pressure, the third time around was the charm with this social pressure. And the, like I said, the results were very dubious, and they were not able to demonstrate that the drug is effective. But it's pretty ingenious marketing campaigns. a lot of thought put into it. There's targeting being done by areas of the population that they deem as growth areas. For instance, girls now, boys are diagnosed 6 times greater likelihood of being diagnosed for ADHD. So now they're moving downstream and trying to get more and more girls diagnosed with ADHD.
Well, I know for many people that are watching, one of the questions that I have, and I know that you alluded to it in the documentary, how do we turn the tide on this? How do we shine a big, bright light on everything that is happening inside the FDA? Because there's so much that's going on that stems from the corruption inside of these governmental agencies that are put in place to protect us. How do we shine this light and stop the madness and protect our children and the adults from this continued pharma profit? Because that's basically what it's about for them. It's just profiting at all costs. Doesn't matter who they hurt in the process.
Yeah, great question. So I think that the biggest thing that we can do is to spread the information around. So having me on your show today is one example, getting this out there. Documentaries like Speed Demons and others. Raising awareness about the problem is an important first step. And make no mistake about it, there is an information war that's going on right now. The pharma-sponsored mainstream media does not want you to know this information. There are, fact checker, air quotes, fact checker organizations like the Poynter Institute, PolitiFact, that have truckloads of cash that are being sent to them from Google, from Facebook. And if you follow the money, Facebook and Google are both getting, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. And so they're meant to cover this up. The second way is to litigate, right? It's not for everyone, but I can just say from personal experience, I never thought I would be suing the most powerful government on the planet, much less prevailing, but that in fact happened. So I would say citizens need to take back their own power. I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't pretend to give advice, but if I were the parent personally in that case that you mentioned in the opening up in Maine, whose child was given an unlabeled bag of Zoloft, I'd be talking to a lawyer right now. So I think those are the two things: information and litigation.
So important. Information is the key. And this is why we do what we do here at Children's Health Defense, because we know that these stories are things that you will not see on mainstream media for sure. And I know that you are dedicated to continuing to get the information out. We want to take a look at Prescription to Kill, which is a new project that you're working on. So let's take a look at the preview for that and then hear a little bit about it.
It was a case that gripped a nation, making headlines across Canada. A father and son weekend trip that ended in tragedy. In this episode of Prescription to Kill, we investigate what may have pushed a Toronto father to do the unthinkable. Fatal shots ring out at a school, a house of worship, a crowded theatre, a packed concert. An increasingly common occurrence, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. Since the first school shootings from West Upper Texas clock tower in 1966, Americans have witnessed a dramatic rise in mass killings. But what's behind the sudden surge of lethal violence? Firearms were introduced to the New World nearly 5 centuries ago, and madness has dogged humanity since the dawn of time. Guns and mental illness, alone or combined, cannot account for this modern carnage. Through a federal lawsuit, one determined researcher cracked open the FDA vault, exposing for the first time secret files linking prescription drugs to mass shootings and infamous murders. In Prescription to Kill, we investigate the hidden connection between the pharmaceutical industry and America's culture of violence.
Wow, looks amazing. So when can we expect to see that drop, and where can people find it?
Yeah, well, it's in post-production right now, season 1. There are half a dozen episodes that have already been shot. Sadly, based on the FDA files, we could do 10 seasons of the show. These are taken directly from the FDA files and ripped from the headlines. Many people don't understand that a lot of these cases that we see in the headlines. You saw a picture of Andrew Yates there. She had 3 different drugs that were in her adverse event report. So we're just essentially continuing the work of Speed Demons, but in this case, it's a docu-series. It'll be shorter, kind of true crime with a medical twist, and it turns out, spoiler alert, they're on the medication.
The common denominator. Well, we're so thankful for you, for your research, for being a stand for the truth, and for ensuring that these stories get out there. It's so important that people understand the impacts of these psychotropic medications and how they are literally destroying people's lives. So I'm so thankful for you for coming on this morning, sharing the amazing research that you're doing. And let's continue the conversation, because I feel like we could spend another 2 hours talking about what you've researched. So I absolutely want to have you come back on for a part 2, especially as this new docuseries drops. So stay in touch with me. And thank you so, so much for everything that you do. Godspeed to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, another action-packed show, and there's so much information. So definitely check out the show notes. There'll be a lot of links there for you. And if you missed the CHD Europe Symposium over the weekend, go back and watch this fierce lineup of speakers such as Catherine Austin Fitz, Meryl Nass, Mary Holland, Aaron Seary, Andrew Bridgen, Pierre Corey, and more. Head over to our events page and watch. And as we end our show and head into another week, please remember that your energy matters, your courage is contagious, and your voice is making a difference. From all of us at CHD TV, thank you for your support. Stay strong, stand firm, and we'll see you back here soon. Have a wonderful week, and thanks so much for tuning in.
Hi, CHD friends. It's me, Mary Holland, president of Children's Health Defense. I reached out to you just a week ago, but I'm reaching out again because so much has happened. The FDA has authorized a new round of COVID shots for a variant that's already gone. And they only tested it on 20 mice. No control group, no human testing. And with no emergency in sight, public health officials authorized these shots for emergency use for babies as young as 6 months. Folks, this is the very definition of amorality. They're pulling out all the stops because we're winning and they're desperate. We're winning in courts around the country and around the world. And we're winning where it counts most, in the court of public opinion. And that's why your support right now makes such a difference. Thanks to our generous supporters, we're running a $1 million match campaign this month. So as the CDC launches its Wild to Mild campaign to hype flu vaccines for adults, pregnant women, and children, with the promise of keeping everyone safe from a bad case of the flu, and while they use your tax dollars to push dangerous HPV vaccines on vulnerable low-income minority teens, and as California's health department threatens to defund schools that have a low student vaccination rate without a shred of scientific evidence on their side, the FDA and CDC want you to believe it's now perfectly safe to get a flu, COVID, and RSV shot all at the same time. The evidence speaks for itself. They are desperate to keep you and me in a perpetual state of fear, and desperate to protect the obscenely lucrative profits from their vaccine pipeline. And like I said, they're desperate because we are winning. Using a legal theory, CHD advanced an appeals court ruled last week that government officials almost certainly violated the First Amendment when they pressured tech platforms to censor posts on social media, even those that were absolutely true, that went against the official narrative. The New York Supreme Court just ordered New York City officials to reinstate 10 teachers with back pay who refused the COVID shots. CHD brought that lawsuit with your donations. These are big wins, and the more we win, the more they ratchet up. Now's the time to prove that with each attack on our freedoms, on our health, on our children, we grow stronger and more resolute. You are our most indispensable resource. You're the engine that keeps this movement running. We are humbled by your generosity, and I want you to know that we will steward your money as if it were our own. Like you, we're in this movement till our last breaths. So thank you.
Join Robert F. Kennedy Jr. live at the Children's Health Defense Conference November 3rd through 5th. Come together in Savannah, Georgia with powerful speakers like Vera Sharav, Catherine Austin Fitts, Asim Malhotra, and so many more. We'll rise and resist as we fight industry corruption, mass surveillance, and censorship. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as we advocate for worldwide rights to health freedom. Visit this link to see the complete lineup of incredible speakers and topics. Space is limited, so register today.